Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 16 Giants in the Earth, 16th Century. In The Winter's Tale, the living Hermione is presented as a statue by that rare Italian master Giulio Romano, who, had he himself eternity and could put breath into his work, would beguile nature of her custom, so perfectly is he her ape. In this 1530 Mantuan vault, his heaven-storming giants fall under the rocks of Pelion and Ossa. In the Tientos of Cabithon, we feel what turned the loves and thought of that century toward Prometheus, Icarus, Phaeton, and Faust. There were giants in the earth in those days when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. And when the spiritual force stored in medieval creed condensers struck through the physical, it stirred gargantuan prodigies, the arts of space and mass, Hermetic and Lucretian science, Reformation, utopias, world conquest, Platonic love, the age of gold, in the dark gathering of the fugue, or the late works of Michelangelo. In this Titian, the very crushing of pride evokes powers unknown before, giants, most of all, giants in their overthrow. Call Leonardo the first of the Titans, one who, with mirror writing and smiling secrecy, left us in doubt how far he enacted the myth of Icarus. If well made and turned swiftly, the said screw will make it spiral in the air, and it will rise high. On another page, a man's descent measures the lift of a starched linen wing. When he has great wings attached to him, by exerting his strength against the resistance of the air, man is enabled to subdue it and to raise himself upon it. Tomorrow morning, on the 2nd day of January, 1496, I will make the thong and the attempt. The vision would haunt Goya after 300 years. While in Tansillo's mid-century sonnet, Poi che spiegato l'ale al bel desio, Icarus becomes the symbol Bruno would appropriate for his heroic furies. Paralleled by the Phaeton of Michelangelo's 1533 drawing. Since first my soul beat wings to the high desire, the vaster sense of air beneath my tread, the swifter pinions to the air I spread, till spurning earth toward heaven I aspire. Not Didal's son warns with example dire that I descend or bow my threatened head. For though with him I plummet earthward dead, what is life's candle to this funeral pyre? I hear my heart's voice through the dusky air. Whither, O fearless darer, would you dare? Not without wreck this giant temerity. Fear not, I answer, what the ruin may be. Hold secure to the clouds and calmly die, content, if heaven allow, a death so high. It was the aspiration that raised Bruno toward his 1600 blaze. On August 2nd, 1473, the 21-year-old Leonardo walked out of Florence and sketched what he saw. What opened was the organic fabric of the world. In the notebooks, an animism defiant as the space toward the right of the picture. The body of the earth, like the bodies of animals, is interwoven with a network of veins which are all joined together and are formed for the nutrition and vivifying of this earth and its creatures. Have you seen how the water that drips from the severed branches of the vine and falls back upon the roots enters into the power of its mover and rises up anew? So the sea, through passages of the earth, returns upward. 40 years later, the bearded old man, in abstract sketches and notes, endows deluge with the cataclysmic necessity of science. Let the fragments of a mountain have fallen into the depths of one of the valleys, and there form a barrier, the swollen waters coursing round the pool which confines them, and striking against various obstacles with whirling eddies, leap into the air in turbid foam, and then, falling back, cause the waters where they strike to be dashed up, so that the angle of reflection will be equal to the angle of incidence. Waves of the sea at Piombino, all of foaming water. Such dark recurrents, Agricola, framed in a geology I once turned to blank verse. So water, working down the block plateau, cuts deep in shale, and leaves the granite whole, rearing the mountains, which upreared the rain that cut vales, cuts in turn, and levels all to plain. Thus I perceive the universal sway. By the same power that builds, all things decay. Leonardo's grotesques share in the gargantuan future of his notebook fable. I will create a fiction which shall express great things. So Rabelais, paraphrasing Erasmus' folly, jests not so foolish as would appear, stuffed with high conceptions, allegorical. Leonardo. In the month of June there appeared a giant who came from the Libyan desert. When he fell, the people, believing he had been killed by some thunderbolt, began scurrying over his huge limbs and piercing them with wounds. He, being roused, set his hands on the ground, and lifting up his awful countenance, placed a hand on his head. Perceiving it to be covered with men sticking to the hairs, he shook himself and sent the men flying through the air like hail. Then he stood erect, trampling them with his feet. The black visage terrifying, swollen, bloodshot eyes under lowering brows, a snout nose, wide nostrils, stuck with bristles, between huge lips a mouth like a cave. That energy would run from the affirming laughter of Rabelais to the grieved negations of Swift, the Brobdingnagian breast. The rival Florentine giant was Michelangelo. It was above the entrance wall that he began the Sistine ceiling. This Delphic Sibyl, about 1509, has the proportioned containment of his earlier Madonnas, though already, as in a ceremony motet by Isaac, everything flexes with grandeur. In a Brummel Gloria, Isaac's 4 voices have been magnified to 12. And when Michelangelo, after 2 years of painting the always expanding vision of creation, conceived the last of the prophets, Jonah, under the torsional twist of the creating God, himself in ecstatic torsion, overflowing his vaulted space, foreshortening it into depth, an expansion which dwarfs the flabby damnation whale, that anagogical theophany of soul from hell as light from darkness, empowered, an exuberant might of body. Against which, from the earliest Christian centuries, Jonah's mystical delivery, as by Christ's descent from the limbo leviathan of eternal death, melts with the Roman heritage of Attic skills in melismas of Ambrosian Alleluia, those jubilous melismas which stirred and troubled Augustine. There had been giants before that melting. When the Apollonius torso was brought to the Belvedere by the Medici Pope Clement VII, Michelangelo found in it the type and inspiration of his own pathos of body. So the Promethean poem of Lucretius, recovered by Poggio Bracciolini, pointed beyond God-fearing habits and taboos. When human life lay prostrate on the earth, a man of Greece against the lowering gods dared traverse in mind the immeasurable universe beyond the flaming walls of the world, like the ripple of muscles in the torso, that flammantia moenia mundi. Yet when Lucretius was replanted in the infinite search of the Christian West, it reached in Tansillo's Icarian flight, Amor m'impenna l'ale, love plumes my wings, and eternal the honor, if mortal the leap, or in the infinite worlds of Bruno's thought, as far beyond itself as Michelangelo's struggling giants exceed the might and longing of Greco-Rome. Out of the religious immediacy of the Gothic North, Grünewald, Michelangelo's contemporary, shapes as radical a claim of death and nature raised to spirit as any in the Hermetic doctrine of signatures by the Swiss Paracelsus, self-styled Prince of Philosophy and Medicine. The winding sheet that enfolds Christ shifts in an unparalleled symbolism of color from the gray blues and browns of earth, death, and the grave, up through incarnate blood to become the received and transmitted glow of pure sol, alchemical gold, poured from the face and hair of the man-God. From Grünewald's crucifixions to this is from Scotch Dunbar's Timor mortis conturbat me to the aureate leap of his dawns. Up sprang the golden candle matutine and spread his beams out pure and crystalline. The skies rang with shouting of the larks. The ruddy heaven, overspread with silver bands, gilded every tree, leaf, branch, and bark. As in the besouled world of German Altdorfer, Dunbar's dawns are the resurrection, his resurrection, dayspring. Done is a battle on the dragon black. He for our sake that suffered to be slain, and like a lamb in sacrifice was dight, is like a lion risen up again, and as a giant raxed him on height, sprung in as aurora, radius and bright, on loft is gone the glorious Apollo, the blissful day departed fro the night, surrexit Dominus de sepulchro. How greatly music after Josquin, hosannas that auroral lion and giant, so Taverna. The heaven stormer was Europe, and at its heart the cosmic humanization of God. About the time of Michelangelo's Jonah and torsional light from dark, Dürer, here standing on the curved earth, lower right, shows the causal measure of the sacred universe. Copernicus, born 2 years after Dürer, was writing his commentary through the same years, though its publication was delayed. We cannot say his observations were better than Ptolemy's, certainly not his mathematics. His science takes its strength from what would culminate in Leibniz, the world marriage of causal reason and faith. Copernicus' God prefers the simplicity and beauty of sun-centered circles. How exceedingly fine is the godlike work of the best and greatest artist. Still, the unknown ellipses required corrective epicycles. Thus 34 circles suffice to explain the entire structure of the universe and ballet of the planets. How much God would have preferred his circles to be 7. To what paven of pomp, humanist light and reason seemed now to enter the lists of state, Maximilian, Francis I, Charles V. We should add Henry VIII, of course, whose meeting with Francis at the 1520 Field of the Cloth of Gold Shakespeare would recount, when those sons of glory, those two lights of men, met in the vale of Andren. Men might say, till this time pomp was single, but now married to one above itself, all in gold. Every man that stood showed like a mine, though, as the play allows, the glittering chivalries ministered communication of a most poor issue. Statecraft reenacting the fiasco of Faust. Those cultured kings against our television hacks. Maximilian, with his 6 languages, art, music, friend and patron of the skilled and wise. For all their great aims, what a hash they made of Europe. Under the knightly mask, the opportunism of Machiavelli, Kaiser Maximilian, 1511. Nothing would better become us than to receive the papal office. We have decided to raise up to 300,000 ducats through the Fugger Bank in Rome, our crown jewels as security. If Fugger, here Durer's portrait of Jacob, shrewd capitalist prototype, wishes to know how we will redeem those treasures, the estates of the empire, hereditary principalities and lands, 1/3 of all our income from the papacy, until it is paid. What Fugger money in fact secured was the election of Charles V. Nor did this Jacob's 1523 demand for payment help the continuing indulgence scandal. It is clear as day that your imperial majesty could not have acquired the Roman crown without my help. I humbly petition that the sum of money due me, together with the interest, should be discharged and paid to me without further delay. With capital, why not the counter-giant of socialism? Geismar, leader of the peasants' rebellion in Tyrol, thought to dissolve clergy, privilege, cities, and business in a classless purity of faith. All smelting houses and mines which belong to nobles or foreign merchants, such as the Fuggers, shall be confiscated and given over to public ownership. This is Geismar's constitution, when he dreams in his chimney corner and imagines himself a prince. No wonder Thomas More, painted by realist Holbein, lets his utopian narrator despair of counseling princes. If I should propose to any king wholesome decrees, how deaf hearers, think you, should I have? Rather he dreams, like Geismar, of a communism both early Christian and modern, where possessions be private, where money beareth all the stroke. It is hard and almost impossible that there the weal public may justly be governed and prosperously flourish. For who knoweth not that fraud, theft, brawling, strife, murder, treason die when money dieth? And though More wears velvet and fur with a great chain of gold, he clothes his sober citizens like Huguenots or Puritans, and sets them, after 6 hours of common work, to wholesome exercise, then to lectures and solemn music in their public halls. Everywhere the drive for heaven turns to the world. As Luther comments on Galatians, and Dürer shows it in his Apostles, when I have this righteousness ruling in my heart, I descend from heaven as the rain making fruitful the earth. That is to say, I come forth into another kingdom, and I do good works. If I be a householder, I govern my house. Yet Luther's zeal stiffens to self-righteousness. I teach those things only which are commanded me from above. Therefore my doctrine is true, sincere, certain, and of God. Therefore whatever doctrine teaches not as mine does must needs be false, devilish, accursed. Calvin most clearly phrased how the new faith should raise the will by its very denial, that man, in miserable necessity, should aspire to the good of which he is destitute, and to the liberty of which he is deprived, and should be roused from indolence with even more earnestness than if he were supposed to be possessed of the greatest strength. Were not the energies of Christendom sprung from the start of incarnate paradox? What are we calling giant? The Soliman Mosque, erected in Constantinople from 1550 to 57, points the question. Are not those vast and area rivals of Hagia Sophia more gigantic in impact than anything from Renaissance Europe, though St. Peter's was then building and is larger? Yet surely there are clues here to the dynamic imbalance by which Istanbul would fall behind with the rest of the Orient and be westernized. The city had been taken by the Ottomans in 1453. Turkish conquest would go on for a century, reaching almost to Vienna, while Europe pursued its Machiavellian broils. But at the Byzantine heart, the late 15th century arcades of the Topkapi Palace look to Tuscany and Venice. What was mighty in the West was a ferment of ideals and hopes, Christian free humanism, transforming self and world, though against sultanic display. The quieter harmonies of Italian Renaissance seem hardly overweening. 1,500 witnesses in all the arts, a style of articulated repose, into which older painters hear Giovanni Bellini move, or where the younger, as Raphael, begin. It affines San Nazzaro's Arcadia to the choral music of the Frotoli and Lauds, the Scala. But that calm throbs with pastoral and Neoplatonic dream, stirring the perfection Quixote was bound to espouse next to chivalry, the age of gold. So corteccia for the Medici, o begli anni dell'oro, o secol divo, vedrò Dio mai? Meanwhile, as in art, from Bellini to Giorgione and Titian, the Frotoli repose advances with the mingling of north and south to the swelling dynamic of the madrigal. Arcadelt is transitional, il bianco e dolce cigno. To learn what is Promethean here, listen to the chords. These full triads of the heart sound music's utopian claim. Here an erotic swan excess, I would die 1,000 times a day. With the same pictures, this Correggio, the romantic Raphael's most romantic scene, when Abimelech saw Isaac with Rebekah, and the Giorgione, let us savor a sonnet by Moltke. Now spring returns to clothe the native hill, and in the valley spreads her finery, and odors such as breathe from Araby, her garland tresses on the wind distill. At this dear season to my window sill, Chloris comes with the sun. Vestiva i colli e le campagne intorno, la primavera di novelli onori, espirava suave a rabi odori, cinta d'erbe e di fiori il crin adorno, quando li cori all'apparir del giorno, gathering purple flowers with her hand, in guiderdon di tanti ardori, in recompense for so much love, she murmurs, these I have culled, and with them here adorn you. Typical the rift between that love sweetness and the fact of Moltke's Roman court life, his Modena home and family deserted, down to his death by the new plague of syphilis, and a last dreaming elegy in pure humanist Latin. As the Gothic landscape ripens in Lotto to Renaissance mood, Della Casa turns Petrarch's mystery to sensuous caress. O sonno, o della quieta, umida, ombrosa notte, placido figlio. Not even in Sydney, come sleep, O sleep, the certain knot of peace, had English quite refined such sounds, oblio dolce de male si gravi. Though Wyatt and Surrey too steep Petrarch in Renaissance shadow. Alas, so all things now do hold their peace, heaven and earth disturbed in no thing. The night is car the stars about doth bring. Calm is the sea, the waves work less and less. From 1504 to 7, Raphael was blending Umbrian, Flemish, and Leonardo in what would hold its own for centuries as the ideal Madonna, a form of womanly grace, of which later artists might say, as Galeazzo di Tarsia did of Italy, membrando la fatal vostra beltate, remembering your fatal beauty. At the same time, the homophonic lauda melodized, as in Fogliano, a timeless Ave Maria. Humanism from the first had invoked eternal presences. 100 years before this Raphael portrait of Castiglione, Platonic courtier, Bruni had written of his chance to study with the Greek Chrysolorus. Thou mayest gaze on Homer, Plato, and Demosthenes, converse with them, and receive their admirable doctrine. So Machiavelli, exiled to his farm, writes 1513 to Vettori, how after a day of snaring thrushes, doing chores, reading by a spring, gabbling with rustics at the inn, when evening comes, I return home and go into my study. On the threshold I strip off my muddy, sweaty workday clothes and put on the robes of court and palace. And in this graver dress I enter the antique courts of ancient men of old, where I am welcomed kindly, and taste the food which is mine alone, and for which I was born. I make bold to speak to them, and ask the motives of their actions, and they, in their humanity, reply to me. And for the space of 4 hours I forget the world and my cares, the troubles of poverty and the fear of death. I live again in their company. From their conversation I have composed a small book on principalities. Raphael's Parnassus and his school of Athens are the art actualizations of those immortals first seen by Dante in the noble castle of Limbo, their light conquering the hemisphere of darkness. And it was from later residence there that Rabelais' Gargantua, 1534, must have conceived the Abbey and Order of Theleme, its one clause and rule, do what thou wilt. Since men that are free, well-born, well-bred, have naturally an instinct and spur that prompteth to virtuous actions, and withdraws them from vice, and it is called honor. Upon the already elevated repose of the early century, and especially of Raphael, Michelangelo's mighty forms broke at the Sistine unveiling with undeflected challenge. Similarly, the ease of Italian harmony was entrained in the canonic rush of Josquin. The result in Raphael fills the later stanzas of the Vatican with muscled nudes, an Aeneas carrying Anchises, with other anomalies of a papal miracle when the old Vatican loggia burned. It was Festa in music who absorbed Josquin into the 1500 Italian, creating the high Roman style for which Palestrina has been disproportionately praised. In his last great works, whether the huge Transfiguration or this small cloud-born Ezekiel, the soft genius of Raphael ventures like Tansilo Icarus in the sonnet, scorning earth, I beat wings to the sky, e spreggio il mondo, e verso il ciel m'invio. Flaminio, who would have thought it possible, after such centuries of darkness, that so many lights should have arisen in a single time? The consciousness of Renaissance seizes even on the outmoded matter of chivalry, whether of Perseus or St. George, the Crusades or the peers of France, working it up in literature to the romantic epic. Pulcis Morgante was a giant, as Don Quixote would say, though disproportionate, affable, and well-bred. The Roland of Boiardo and Ariosto is a man, yet his love-mad actions in the Orlando Furioso are Quixote's giant model in the Morena, when those naked somersaults give Sancho more than he might report to Dulcinea. In England it is Spenser, Ariosto through a Protestant filter, the Red Cross knight in the den of error. She, wrapping up her wreathed stern around, leapt fierce upon his shield, and her huge train all suddenly about his body wound, that hand or foot to stir he strove in vain. God help the man so wrapped in error's endless chain. If Spenser had looked for a picture to illustrate his fairy queen, he could hardly have found a better than Tintoretto's St. George, where the romance wonder of Ariosto becomes a moral allegory, like the defense of Una or truth from the fiend. And pointing forth, "Lo, yonder is," said she, "the brazen tower in which my parents dear, for dread of that huge fiend imprisoned be, whom I from far see on the walls appear." With that they heard a roaring hideous sound. 3 passion days the Red Cross knight fights, wounds the brass-plated monster with his steel, but he's thrown down to rise recovered, first from the well of life and then from the tree, on the 3rd day transfixing the dragon through his hollow maw. So down he fell, and like an heaped mountain lay. From this billowing ground swell, as from Tasso's Jerusalem delivered, or the lute monodies of Galilee. To return to Ariosto is to enter a thaumaturgy of Gothic poignance in high Renaissance, the lute ricercari of the early 1500s, Capirola, Mantegna's last painting of virtue and the pool of vice, Orlando's dream of Angelica upon the Dante Petrarch flowered strand. He took such present pleasure in his dream as lovers feel possessing their desire, a moment only. Then a tempest came and bore the flowers and leaves down heavy air. His love was lost there, and the bordered stream whelmed in dark and cloud and without reason, while he went up and down sounding her name, demanding of the echoing fields and forests, "Who has changed my sweetness into poison?" And then he heard his lady, and she too cried. Weeping, she called upon him for his aid. He hurried to the sound. It shifted place. He turned again, still seeking back and forth, in bitter sorrow for his vanished solace. And then another voice came from the north, "Abandon hope of happiness on earth." At this appalling cry he wakes, he stars, and finds himself, as in his dream, in tears. How could such magic fail to seed wonders over Europe? The natural life that had volleyed from Gothic north to Ars Nova south and come back north, enriched toward Renaissance, as with Chaucer or the first bird virelays of late 14th century France. That vigor ripening as in Oswald von Wolkenstein to the tenderness of Tyrolean heart.
Liri, 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 lon. So sang die Lerch, so sang die Lerch, so sang die Lerch. Ich sing hell ein Droschlein, ich sing hell ein Droschlein, ich sing hell ein Droschlein, das in dem Wald erklingt.
Dips south once more, and so returns to France in the space and robes of 1500, the frottlely chords and rhythms, to take in Janequin's 1528 Song of the Birds the gusto of Francis and Rabelais. Here is the nightingale couplet with an entrance of the refrain, while tapestry details hold the screen from the noble pastorals and the chase of the unicorn.
Rossignol du bois, joli, à qui l'avoir raison, l'avoir raison, vous mettre votre gorge, je mets
Grangousier's friends could not have warbled better over their cups. In the new kingdoms, feudal castles shed their walls, looking to the villas and gardened palaces of Italy. Compton Wynyates sets the mode in Henry VIII's England, the mullioned windowed hall in a wooded land, with church, farm, village, the great house built in the brick and half-timbering of the rural cot. A description of evening in Neville's Castle of Pleasure, 1518, restores that nature and mood. The night drew nigh, the day was at a side. My heart was heavy, I much desired rest, when without comfort alone I did abide, seeing the shadows fall from the hills in the west. Each bird under bough drew nigh to their nest. The chimneys from far began to smoke. Each householder went about to lodge his guest. The stork, fearing storms, took the chimney for a cloak. Curfew was rung, lights were set up in haste, which were plain precedents. The day was clearly past. France was more formal, and from Leonardo down more open to Italy. But the chateaux of the Loire were as close to forest and chase, fields and harvest, as the court poet Marot, in his 1539 Eclogue to the King, where he tells of his youth in that still wooded land. Villon's old cry of vanity, de ma jeunesse folle, here Renaissance affirmed. Sur le printemps de ma jeunesse folle, je ressemble l'hirondelle qui vole, puis ça, puis là. Such the European blend of nature and custom that Spenser can describe his English boyhood by varying Marot, as Marot had learned from Florentine Poliziano. Nel vago tempo di sua verde etate viviasse lieto in pace e in libertate. Spenser. While I'm in youth, when flowered my joyful spring, like swallow swift I wandered here and there. I went the wasteful woods and forest wide, withouten dread of wolves to be espied. Even in the gilt and panelled galleries of Fontainebleau, the legends painted by Rosso Fiorentino, Primaticcio, dell'Abate, have absorbed, as from stream and forest, the freshness Spenser translated from Marot. Ô quantefois aux arbres grimpé j'ai, How often have I scaled the craggy oak, all to dislodge the raven of her nest? How have I wearied with many a stroke the stately walnut tree, the whilst the rest under the tree fell all for nuts at strife, for alike to me was liberty and life, though the last line is Spenser's alone. And it is also at Fontainebleau that art cultivation of nature is expressed in a harvest landscape as real as Du Bellai's song of the wheat winnower to the winds, "À vous trop légère, j'offre ces violettes." As Lang closes it, "Ah, winnow with sweet breath, winnow the holt and heath, round this retreat, where all the golden morn we fan the gold of the corn in the sun's heat." The new world did not simply offer itself, it was opened by the swelling prothalamion of that love. Against the bridal day, which is not long, sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. In crusading chivalry, the battle joy of the North had refined itself into art. Israelites and Ammonites take the arms of Franks and Moors. Bertrand de Born had voiced that keenness in the poem's pound flung at an age weary of war. It pleaseth me to the heart when I see strong castles besieged and barriers broken and riven. As revived in a sestina, hell grant soon we hear again the swords clash and the shrill neighs of destriers in battle rejoicing, spiked breast to spiked breast opposing. With what physical depths the tide of Renaissance endows that fabled stour, Altdorfer's Alexander, Janequin's Battle of Marignan, both of 1529. The battles of Bible and myth yield to Titian's Charles V at the actual victory of Mühlberg, yet he holds the mythic stance, Othello's pride, pomp, and circumstance of glorious war, which Baroque and even Napoleonic heroes would cling to. It is almost the lusty make-believe of Pantagruel against the Dipsodes, how Panurge and 3 others vanquished and discomfited 603 horsemen very cunningly, winding them in with ship's cables to a trap of gunpowder. What buoys up the make-believe is the expanding giant reality of man and world. Magellan had just rounded that globe. Copernicus had set it revolving in planetary space. To an always mounting blazon of art and music, this will Richacare, even those inadequate kings who stride the curved horizon, play Shakespearean hero roles. Methinks it were an easy leap to pluck bright honor from the pale-faced moon. In Patineer, the rounded Magellanic margin first stretches a Bosch dream, Chiron ferrying a soul toward a fiery shore. The boldest pre-Columbian prophecy, in Pulci's Morgante 1482, is communicated by a fiend, Astarote. Hung among the stars by God's mystery, the world has everywhere the form of a wheel, and as it draws all things to its center, you can sail beyond the gates of Hercules and come at last to the other hemisphere with castles and kingdoms unknown to us here. So the Altdorfer we have seen, and by 1558 Bruegel's Fall of Icarus, where the widening earth, the galleon traffic of the sea, leaves the old myth only a few plumes, a drowning flash of legs, white feathers the gulf claims. Though if Icarus is so discounted, the global flight goes on. Thus 2 printed maps, Germanus from 1487, the Eurasian landmass, with Africa to the Cape of Good Hope, filled in with the names Diaz had just given, the hemisphere of water unknown, and from 1550, Deschelier, the Mercator projection, but for Australia and parts of Asia, almost as we would draw it today. And where for centuries Buddhist guardian daimons had warned venturing aliens from sacred shrines, as this Vajrapani in the Todaiji temple of Nara, Japan. Suddenly mission schools were teaching Christianity and the Western arts. Did lute romances even there sound the new grandeur of man, Milan's Durandarte? At the heart of the unyielding vastness of Russia, the Kremlin, this 1509 Cathedral of Michael, on an otherwise Byzantine Mass, displays the scallop shells of Italy, as from Brunelleschi's lantern on the dome of Florence. At the same time, Russian chant took the passion for Roman harmony, which would end with the Cossacks swelling the Psalms of David for the audiences of America. Though in the church militant icon of the time of Ivan, the force already flowing from Venice just stirs the surface, or perhaps the depths, of what Henry Adams would still call that Eastern vis inertia. In Spanish Inquisition Flanders, Bruegel had advanced from the early Icarus to the stupendous landscapes of the months, this gloomy day, from which the ultimate stormscapes of Rubens would take their cue. In English, the mightiest poem from the same time is Sackville's Induction. The wrathful winter approaching on apace, with blustering blasts had all ybarred the treen, and old Saturnus with his frosty face, with chilling cold had pierced the tender green, the mantles rent wherein enwrapped been the gladsome groves that now lay overthrown, the tappets torn and every bloom down blown. Small fowls flocking in their song did rue the winter's wrath, wherewith each thing defaced in woeful wise bewailed the summer past. When lo, the night with misty mantles spread, gan dark the day and dim the azure skies, it taught me well all earthly things be born to die the death, for naught long time may last, the summer's beauty yields to winter's blast. On the cresting life wave, comic and tragic blend, if the dish be pleasant, either flesh or fish, 10 handis at once swarm in the dish, and if it be flesh, 10 connives shalt thou see, mangling the flesh, and in the platter flee. To put there thy handis is peril, without fail, without a gauntlet or else a glove of mail. Oft in such dishes in court is it seen, some leave their fingers, each knife is so keen. On a finger gnaweth some hasty glutton, supposing it a piece of beef or mutton. Whatever Berkeley's eclogues about 1510 owe to the humanist Pope Piccolomini, they stand on the huge slope of farce that leads from the Middle Ages through Rabelais and Bruegel to Cervantes and Shakespeare. With Rabelais, that farce takes the prodigious flesh it can only have where the sons of God have gone in to the daughters of men. L'occasion et manière comment Gargamel enfanta fut telle, et s'il ne le croyait, le fondement vous escape. The occasion and manner how Gargamel gave birth was this, and if you do not believe me, may your bumgut fall out. Her bumgut indeed did fall out from eating too many tripes. Grangousier bade his wife eat sparingly, because she was near her time. Notwithstanding, she did eat 16 quarters, 2 bushels, 3 pecks, and a pipkin full. What a filthy deal of loblolly was this, to swell and wamble in her guts. While they were drinking, she began to be a little unwell in her lower parts. The midwives, groping her below, found some pilateries of a very bad savour, which they thought had been the child, but it was her fundament, which had escaped from eating too many tripes, whereupon an old ugly trot made her a medicine so binding that all her arse pipes were so oppilated, stopped, and obstructed, you could scarcely have opened them with your teeth, which is a terrible thing to think on. Rubens crests the monstrous vindication of body, a gargantuan tie especially in the riotous Baroque, though we have trimmed it, of Matteux and Urquhart's Rabelais. After the thin Gothic nudes, Titian and Rubens. Falstaff also poses the question how bulk serves exuberance. Apt, we call it humour. And Renaissance languages, most of all English, with Latinate verbosination, to such exsufflicate and blown surmises matching thy inference, laid on enormous weight, yet trained it on home truths. From garden giants, Giambologna's Apennines, through Momper's Man Mountain called Summer, to the door mouth of the Casa Zuccari in Rome, we search the portentous overflow of symbol into body, the coincidence of humanist learning with huge codpieces, of Pantagruel's Tartarian guts, the time he was sick and swallowed 17 workers in copper balls, who opening spring traps came out with lanterns and spades, and groping and falling through a horrid infectious gulf, smelled their way to the fecal blockage, dug it up, cleaned it out with baskets, and so re-entering their copper spheres were vomited forth. the link between that and the great-souled letter Pantagruel receives from his father, exhorting to unbounded knowledge and virtue, to study all history, languages, manners, and chivalry, law, mathematics, science. For knowledge of the works of nature, let there be no sea, river, or fountain of which you do not know the fishes, all fowls of the air, trees and shrubs of the forest, plants of the earth, all metals hid in its depths. Let me see thee a bottomless pit of knowledge. As in the thought of Paracelsus, no limits here, no abstract denial or separation of soul from earth and practice. The revelational order, like the starry spheres, has broken. In the mosaic domes of Byzantine Venice, where the creation of earth and biblical life of man circles its God center, the quest of delight reduces to an Eden episode and banishment of those angular, breast-fallen, flesh-denying nudes, all poignance of wish and loss gathered in rings of eternal gold. Where is the cry Ausonius distilled from the long earth-love of Greece and Rome? To fill out Raphael's papal ceiling, Collige virgo rosas, maiden, pluck the rose.
Voyez comment peu d'espace,
which Poliziano would revive with Quattrocento tenderness, Cogliam la bella rosa del giardino, and the rebirth send abroad from Florence this Ronsard, mignon allons voir si la rosa, Spencer's translation from Tasso, gather the rose of love whilst yet is time, down to Marvel's cormorant defiance, and tear our pleasures with rough strife, thorough the iron gates of life. Against the ascetic leap beyond death, the cry of time and flesh takes new imperative, as in the gaze of Primaticio's Ulysses, however late it is, to tell Penelope, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. In that field of passionate impossibility, no poem has more beauty than the Ronsard sonnet Yeats would redo, when you are old and grey and full of sleep, though we have still to translate it. When you are old at evening, carding wool, bent to the glow of fire and candlelight, you will say, marvelling at this verse I write, Ronsard sang of me when I was beautiful. There will not be a servant of them all, however spent with labour in the night, but starting at my name will praise your fate, as one whom fame acclaims and ever shall. My bones will be underground, my ghost above rest in the twilight of the myrtle grove. You will be hunched at the fire, old and grey, regretting my love and your proud disdain. The time that passes will not come again. Believe me, pluck the rose of life today. That imperative is hurled against the recorded fate, you old and grey. Regrettons mon amour et votre fier destin. So cousins, snake-wreathed, skull-propped Eve, as first Pandora. Quand vous serez bien vieux au soir à la chandelle, assise auprès du feu dévidante et filante, direz, chantant mes vers, en vous émerveillante, Ronsard me célébra du temps que j'étais belle. Lors vous n'aurez servante, voyant telle nouvelle, déjà sous le labeur à demi sommeillante, qui au bruit de mon nom ne s'est réveillante, bénissant votre nom de louange immortelle. Je serai sous la terre, et fantôme sans eau, par les ombres myrteux je prendrai mon repos. Vous serez eau fouillée, une vieille accroupie. Regrettons, mon amour, et votre fier dédain. Vivez si m'en croyez, n'attendez à demain. Cueillez dès aujourd'hui les roses de la vie. No doubt the poem exceeds French art of the time, requires the tragic radiance of Correggio's Antiope, or this Titian Venus of Pardo, the crux of Age of Gold, as in Tasso's Aminta, se piace e lice, if it pleases, it is allowed, against a world which grows old and sad, il mondo invecchia, e invecchiando intrisce. What power of the rebirth makes that desired Arcadia so real? Amiam, let us love, for the sun dies and is born, but for us its brief light fades, and sleep brings on eternal night. Il sonno eterna notte adduce. No doubt the magnified embodiment we are calling giant was implicit in the man-god reach of the Middle Ages. Already this Mary of painted limestone left, French, about 1320, smiles the sensuous poignance of Gothic humanization, though the archaic smile of the Greek chore is not more mysteriously suspended. To set, against its wistful ethereality, the mood and brooding weight of Michelangelo's 1530 Medicean Madonna is to touch the very pulse of prophetic enfleshment. As in dialectic theology, so in medieval discant, here English, early 14th century, or in the always more ingenious vaulting of cathedral stone, this Lady Chapel of Wells, we feel the stretching of that bow of spirit. In music, indeed, all later styles had to shape their being from the Gothic store. That architecture could have done likewise, Spain makes startlingly clear. In the 1500 Condestable Chapel of Burgos, as in this Spanish polyphony, articulate renaissance has been achieved without the intervention of the classical. While the crossing of Burgos, 1568, within the same Gothic and Moorish idiom, has solemnized a wreathing as grand as the many-voiced summits of polyphony. From this 12-part Inviolata attributed to Josquin, through Gombert, Willaert, Morales, to the mightiest of all, Talus, spem in alium, whose 40 voices fuse in a chordal enormity of passionate lowing, as of the brazen cow in which the tyrant of Syracuse burned his victim. The concept of a 40-voice fabric is as far from the century before as folk plays from Rabelais, or this illuminated Tower of Babel quaintly harried by the angels from the 1563 Bruegel, where the claim of the mighty ones in the earth is spatially enacted. Though perhaps Tallis' greatest music is in the 5-voice Lamentations of Jeremiah, here in the epoch-making Della recording. These passionate implorations might span the continent of that tragic century, from the 1500 Gothic spatiality of King's College Chapel, Cambridge, to the thunderhead of Michelangelo's Judgment in Counter-Reformation Rome, of which a crude variant clouds a wall of the also late Gothic Beaufort Chapel in Warwick. Tallis, like Byrd, was a Catholic, writing in an England where despoiled monasteries enforced Shakespeare's metaphor of age, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. How could the Titan, calmly revealed in the Renaissance island of 1500, knit incarnate thews, but in judgment tragedy and the war of values, which darkening to the Lear storm would found, confound, and fortify the airy earth freedoms first dreamed? As Milton would say, what purifies us is trial, and trial is by what is contrary. It is in Christian denial of his Promethean self and art that Michelangelo made the syntax of the sonnet a poetic battleground of hope and fear. Giunto è già al corso della vita mia, con tempestoso mar per fragil barca, al comun porto, ove a render si varca conto e ragion d'ogni opera trista e pia. Already now, across tempestuous seas, uncharted course, my brittle bark has blown to the common port, where all come to own account and cause of goods and trespasses. Wherefore the loving fancy's subtleties, that made of art an idol and a throne, break in deception, snares too late known, such bitter sweets as to damnation please. Amorous thoughts, long since proved vanities, what are you now, if double death incline, one sure, one doubted, both foretasted harms? Not any mastery of paint or stone can ease the heart that sees how love divine spreads on the cross to gather us his arms. Né pinger, né scolpir, fie più che quieti, l'anima volta a quell'amor divino, qu'aperse a prender noi in croce le braccia. How far this last Michelangelo's self, Nicodemus as lamenting world father, has come from that youthful morning with Leonardo, Pico, and the rest in Medici Florence, how tragically pushed that self's prophetic claim. What high Renaissance had reached for in Neoplatonism, Josquin's Musica Reservata, in Raphael, or as here in the first works of Titian, was the earthly eternity of divine beauty and good. What Sidney would give Sapphic measure in his remaking of Sanazzaro's 1500 Arcadia. If the senseless spheres do yet hold a music, if the swan's sweet voice be not heard but at death, if the mute timber, when it hath the life lost, yieldeth a lute's tune, are then human minds privileged so meanly, as that hateful death can abridge them of power, with the voice of truth to record to all worlds that we be her spoils? The embodiment of that Promethean claim would lead those devotees through fields of lowering actuality, as Don Quixote would exclaim, "I do not even know how chivalry can work in so depraved a time." In the sonnet, the crisis would run from Michelangelo to Campanella to Góngora in Spain, in England to Shakespeare, and thereafter to Donne. The raptures of idea and form, not mine own fears, nor the prophetic soul of the wide world dreaming on things to come, can yet the lease of my true love control, supposed as forfeit to a confined doom. Buckle under the assault of fact. Tired with all these, for restful death I cry, as to behold desert a beggar born, maiden virtue rudely strumpeted, captive good attending captain ill. Thus Titian, nearing 80, self-portrayed in an allegory of prudence and the ages of man. Titian, climaxing a productive life which reached from the laude and throttly repose of 1500 to the star-crossed pathos of the last Passion pictures, a darkening so widely shared, we seize almost at random from a generation of music on Lassus penitential songs. The age-long threat of Moorish invasion broke in Lepanto, where Cervantes was maimed and then taken into slavery. But there was a symbolic Lepanto of new against old, and Cervantes was not the only giant of the spirit who fought there. In some such engagement, Bruno went up in flames. Galileo went captive behind Inquisition walls. It is hard for products of enlightenment to realize that the religious heightening is no less titanic than the worldly, no less fraught with earth-transforming danger. Bruno was a churchman, and who knows if the mystic frenzy of El Greco had been translated into thought and word, how heretical it might have been. Was not John of the Cross accused for those amorous meetings with Christ, where the loved into lover was changed? In Tintoretto it is Mary of Egypt who shares a night as God tinctured, as when Juan de la Cruz ascended Mount Carmel. En una noche escura, con ansias en amores inflamada. It is the night Tasso pooled with moonlight, silence, and love. What dewdrops, what tears, quae lagrime eran quelle. The woods and streams are quiet, and without wave the sea. Sien muti baci, e muti miei sospiri. Or in his Jerusalem, the Erminia brooding, which Fairfax has gleamingly rendered. Invested in her starry veil the night, in her kind arms embraced all this round. The silver moon from sea uprising bright spread frosty pearl on the candid ground, and Cynthia-like for beauty's glorious light the love-sick nymph threw glistering beams around, and counsellors of her old love she made those valleys dumb, that silence and that shade, e secretarie del suo amore antico, fair I muti campi, e quel silenzio amico. Since the mid-century chromatic experiments of Vicentino and Lassus, music had explored the mode of dramatic emotion and crepuscular melting. In Marenzio's setting of Petrarch's Night Sonnet, Solo e penso sui più deserti campi, what vast glimmerings of the plasmic world have been explored since Petrarch. The upper voice runs a half-tone scale from G to high G and back to C, setting all the other voices nocturnally awash. Let this unknown Frenchman of the late century, with Claude Lejeune's measured spring song, remind us of that modest giant, Montaigne. In his essay on presumption, he asks, with regard to a self-portrait Renate of Sicily had sent Francis II, Why is it not as lawful for every man else to portray himself with his pen as it were for him to do with a pencil? How can Montaigne, in that portrayal, neglect the scar he calls his cicatrice? In Hamlet's words, that the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. At a time when the resolve of the Protestant Bourbon was besieging and starving Catholic Paris, that flaw becomes the virtue of a civilized man. Le peuple se trompe. Grandeur of soul consists not so much in mounting and pressing forward as in knowing how to govern and circumscribe itself. There is no science so arduous as to know how to play the man, to live this life. For my part, I love life and cultivate it, such as it has pleased God to bestow it on us. I accept with gratitude what nature has done for me. The great omnipotent giver, all goodness himself, has made everything good. Transcendental humors affright me. Who would escape being men do not transform themselves into angels, but into beasts. Yet how transcendental, in the later sense, is this perfection of being ourselves, without miracle, without extravagance, gay and sociable, nor let music be wanting. No less the product of a giant century than the radical powers being then suppressed in Italy. Pomponazzi, early in the century, had expressed the fate to follow. The philosopher is a very Prometheus. Seeking to penetrate the secrets of God, he is consumed with ceaseless cares, forgets to eat and sleep, is derided of all men, held for a fool and unbeliever. Harried by inquisitors, he becomes the gaping stock of the common crowd. A prophecy fulfilled in Bruno. And so I spread wide pinions to the air, nor fear the impasse of glass or crystal sphere, piercing the heavens to the infinite. And as I leave this globe and mount the vast, beating my way across the ethereal waste, I lose the care of every common sight. The last Promethean work of Renaissance was the grappling with the starry universe. The first representation of that fathomless night nature had been in the Très Riche Earls at the start of the 15th century. By 1440, Cusanus was formulating it. And although our universe is not infinite, nevertheless one cannot conceive of it as finite. It is not enclosed in boundaries, nor is the earth its center, nor any sphere of the stars its circumference. It has its center everywhere, its circumference nowhere, because God is its circumference and center, he who is everywhere and nowhere. Plato, in fact, said the world is animate, and if one conceives God as its soul, without immersion, much of what we have said will be clear. As Elsheimer, 1609, stretches out that starry sky, Bruno's soaring expands the cosmos of Cusanus. For us consists the universal sphere as a single, all-overspreading, infinite, immovable continuum, in which numberless spheres or particular worlds exist. There is but one sky, one immeasurable world space, one matrix, one universal connective, one ether region through which the whole moves. In this become visible innumerable stars, constellations, world bodies, and suns. Of these our earth is one, yet not a single one is the center, for the universe is in all directions equally immeasurable. The earth and all other constellations have their own soul, which again is but a part of the world's soul. By 1610, Galileo's sidereal messenger communicates the shattering news of telescopic sights. He had begun the true exploration of worlds in space. Other stars in myriads, never seen before, the body of the moon 30 times larger, like the face of the earth itself, everywhere full of vast protuberances, deep chasms, and sinuosities. 4 planets, neither known nor observed before my time, which have their orbits round a certain bright star, the moons of Jupiter. Of the enterprise of the century, as of the later West, 2 things had been clear from the start, that it was giant and that it was perilous. They knew of old those myths of Titans in the world, as once I applied the symbol of this picture. And all whom superstitions of the dark had thundered down for daring, Icarus sun-melted, Phaeton Jove destroyed, Prometheus of the fire, and Lucifer of morning, Niobe made tears, and Semele love burning, rose divinely, winging west with the dawn. We feel the fatal angels strike the tower, or through the slant rifts of the rock-hurled hail glimpse dreads of distance, where our running kind shot with his lightnings fall, and the mountains drown.